All right, that's a good trick, yeah. That's what we're there.
All right, good to go, y'all. That's louder what it needs to be. Let's see. Testing. Testing. One, 2. 1, 2. That'll work.
I sent you something.
Yeah. The thing is,
Any
you
other
should be
announcements that
on
you
my
make
phone
on?
where all the.
No,
I don't see you down there.
just the kids' Bible study at
Oh, no worries.
the house, 5:30 Saturday.
I'll have to look for you.
Which is what I say.
Right.
Once we were talking, we were on farm time together, that horse is in Pat.
I didn't realize that was,
Oh, some, no, it's on computer farm.
I
I gotta go farm. I gotta go, but you.
bought those.
Oh, that button?
Uh-huh, little buttons. There's 50 in the pack, or no. Hold on, let me see. Yes.
Sometimes I think I have cancer. Oh my gosh.
There's 25 of those, and then I found some bees. Little button bees, there's 50 in that one. And then here's the teeth. I actually got a better deal. I bought 160 something, or 180 something for $11. So we'll have forever.
Yeah, that's
You
kind of
really
thing.
have those buttons, don't you?
That's teeth.
That's the kind of thing that, well, even for our labs, that looks in class.
Right, 2 for 2.
Oh, teeth.
So it's teeth.
As in, wisdom teeth.
Yeah, that's what his was on, this little thing like that, and that pocket watch.
And then here's the sheet.
I'm just itching, I think I know.
There's 18 in that.
They're not real big.
They're not. They are just regular buttons. It's they're just buttons for shirts.
No, but I'm not itching crazy, I think it is just for. She died in her 30s because of muscular disease and
You said you had prices that I found some.
Welcome back, I see you.
Hey, dear, I know.
And there's
Been a while on.
50 pieces. They're not even an inch.
Now, the grandbabies are due, one of them.
I think those are the ones you got.
He came a week early. He was due February 7th, so not anything big.
Yeah.
Oh,
Now, I would say 2 weeks before or after they actually did your due date.
yeah, exactly.
So, my daughter came, almost 2 weeks after her due date.
Oh my goodness, and I don't think they even do that anymore. I don't think they ever let you go past anymore.
Well, she
hardly.
weighs 9 pounds, 1 and a half.
Oh, wow.
I think that they can each weigh after their due date.
Well, it's about time you decide to come home.
Exactly.
I said it's about time you decide to come home.
I hear you.
Yeah, but you weren't listening.
That's like the Donna.
You're trying to ignore me.
This is like presidents, I'm sorry.
As I told Rhonda, I came home and didn't move off the couch for 2 days.
Why?
It's exhausting.
Exhaustion? The grandchildren did that to you?
Yeah. Taking care of a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a newborn, they can get you down.
Yeah, I guess.
Our grandson, March 6th, will be 16.
Oh my goodness.
I just made his card today.
That is crazy.
Oh, his sister will be 18 in June.
Oh, so now, has she graduated high school or?
She's going to, yeah.
So where is she planning on going to school or?
She's not sure yet.
It says there's 5,100
So she's
pieces.
really into the artwork.
Oh,
She's
yeah.
seeing the artwork. I don't have a board because that's probably. She's seen it.
Oh, it's awesome. She's.
Oh, I bet. So she's thinking graphic design area maybe?
Oh my goodness, there's Kathy.
I'm back. You are too.
I'm back at least.
Hello, Sharon.
Hello, Dale.
How are you?
John is, I got a doctor appointment this morning.
John's what?
We don't know what you're calling us tomorrow.
Okay. We'll let Ron know. Ron's making announcements tonight.
Yeah.
I haven't turned on the record yet.
I just tested, make sure for
So
him.
last week it wouldn't work.
Yeah.
Oh, that is really cool.
You
Yeah.
can go ahead and put record on if you want to.
I want to see
That's
that.
so cool.
There you go.
Thank you.
Now they will. See if this works. Probably doesn't. No.
I need to click on it. Scroll down. Actually, just hit Alt. Well, let me do it.
Hit Alt.
Alt tab. Now try it. There you go.
It does work when you hit Alt tab.
Well, you just gotta, you choose it. When it comes up on the screen, choose what program you're jumping to.
Ah. Huh? It's off? We'll go holler at him.
Just back.
We're contemplating half and half.
Half and half?
Kids.
Half here, half there. How's Sam Mom? Did you make it this time?
We made it, but she was sick the first half, and I was sick the second half.
And Stephanie was simply over gone.
Yeah.
That ain't worth it. That ain't worth moving.
Oh my goodness, I don't think y'all should go back there.
We're not going on any more 14-day trips, and we're not going in January anymore. In fact, I've already scheduled a cruise for April of next year.
Where to?
Well, the only island we haven't been to, actually not an island, but the one time we were supposed to go to Belize, we didn't get to go to Belize because the tenders were striking. They wanted more money, so they went to Cayman Islands instead. So we're going to take a 7-day cruise out of Galveston, and it'll go to Cozumel, which we've been there a couple of times, and it'll go to the Bahamas. We've been there 4 or 5 times, but it'll go to Belize. And Belize is all I care about.
Then get on a plane and just fly through Belize and you're done.
No, I may just buy a piece of land and just stay there.
Oh, now if you knew that, I'm moving too.
Where's Belize?
Well, where are you moving to?
In the Caribbean.
I'm staying
Where am I
over
going
here.
to?
Yeah.
She's moving in with you.
She's going down on your board.
Get a big enough one.
Better get a big house.
We better get a big house because my wife won't be happy.
Tents.
Hello, Karen. Okay, we're in Exodus, the 21st chapter. We were just starting the 21st chapter last week, so we'll begin again at the beginning of the 21st chapter because this deals with laws, feasts, and seasons. And verses 2 through 6 of Exodus 21 deals with duty of masters towards their servants and their men servants. And then verses 7 through 11 deals with maid servants. But just as a reminder, what's significant about this here? Exodus 2, verse 23, all the way through Exodus 39. Huh?
2 years?
Trigger, that's the laws and the time they're moving from Egypt over to the tabernacle.
What was the time period?
2 years.
About a year.
1 year. We haven't even completed a year since they left Egypt. So that's significant to remember because of what's going on here with the children of Israel. So,
It shows they didn't have very much stick-to-itness.
the only people I know of, the Douthits are not going to be here tonight because Adam has the flu, so they're staying home.
Stay away from me.
And I know there are other people that are not able to be here because of sickness. We want to keep them in our prayers as well. Isaac apparently is still sick. They weren't here Sunday morning, Isaac and Leanne Colvin.
I saw their car out there, but
Who?
I think Isaac was in the car.
Oh, well maybe, well they may be helping somebody come in, so I don't
He'll
know.
show up if he's there.
Yeah, he'll be in.
He might be seeing things. It was dark, but he waved at me through the window and it kind of looked like him when I got out of my car.
Hopefully they're feeling better. Let's go to our Heavenly Father in prayer. Our most loving Heavenly Father, we thank Thee so much for this day and for the many blessings that You've given us, and we thank Thee, Father, for the many spiritual blessings and the promise of everlasting life will be faithful to Thee. We thank Thee, Father, for each and every member of this congregation, for the encouragement that we bring to each other. We thank Thee for our visitors and for the encouragement that they bring to us. And we thank Thee, Father, for the many talents of this congregation, for those members who are willing to teach, those who are willing to do various duties here in the congregation, that we might continue to serve You in the best way possible. For those who are willing to visit and send cards and make phone calls, we thank Thee for all of this use of the talents, and we ask, Father, that You give us additional talents that we can do greater things in Thy vineyard. We thank Thee, Father, for our upcoming gospel meeting, and we pray that You'd be with our gospel meeting, that it would bear much fruit, that truly this congregation would grow spiritually, and with that spiritual growth would be numerical growth. And we thank Thee, Father, for the opportunity we had to be able to study Thy Word without fear of persecution. And we ask, Father, that You'd be with us as we look into the book of Exodus, that we might have a full understanding of those things that You want us to know, so that we can be better able to teach and encourage others, that they might know the joys of being a Christian before it's everlasting too late. These things we ask in Jesus Christ's holy name. Amen. All right, let's go back and read verses 1 through 11. And Donna, why don't you read verses 1 through 6 for me, and Karen, if you would read verses 7 through 11.
Now these are the ordinances which you are to set before them. If you buy a Hebrew slave, he shall serve for 6 years, and on the 7th he shall go out as a free man without payment. If he comes alone, he shall go out alone. If he is the husband of a wife, then his wife shall go out with him. If his master gives him a wife, and she bears him sons and daughters, the wife and the children shall belong to her master, and he shall go out alone. But if the slave plainly says, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go out as a free man. Then his master shall bring him to God, then he shall bring him to the door or the doorpost, and his master shall pierce his ear with an awl, and he shall serve him permanently.
Verse 7.
It's not quite up yet.
That's all right.
I thought you said Sharon.
Do what? No, I said Karen.
Okay.
7 through 11.
Okay, it's all us up here.
Now I might mention, Kathy, while she's turning to that, if you'll be turning to Leviticus, the 25th chapter. We'll read that in just a moment.
When a man sells his daughter as a slave, she shall not go out as the male slaves do. But if she does not please her master, who has designated her for himself, then he shall let her be redeemed. He shall have no right to sell her to a foreign people, since he has broken faith with her. If he designates her for his son, he shall deal with her as with a daughter. If he takes another wife to himself, he shall not diminish her food, her clothing, or her marital rights. And if he does not do these 3 things for her, she shall go out for nothing, without payment of money.
Okay, so verses 1 through 11 deals with the judgments, the master and the servant relationship. And I mentioned, excuse me, Mike Willis last week, and John asked who was Mike Willis. Shelton looked it up, and Mike Willis is a conservative gospel preacher, and if I remember right, he's preaching in Kentucky, if that's where, I think it's
Kentucky, but I forgot where it was.
Anyway, he is a gospel preacher. He's written several books and everything, and so I took a little bit of this information from one of his books on the book of Exodus that he wrote. Anyway, what he states is that a Hebrew might become a slave through poverty, and that's where we come into Leviticus, the 25th chapter, verses 35 through 45. You want to read that much, Kathy?
That's fine. If one of your brethren becomes poor and falls into poverty among you, then you shall help him, like a stranger or a sojourner, that he may live with you. Take no usury or interest from him, but fear your God, that your brother may live with you. You shall not lend him your money for usury, nor lend him your food at a profit. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, to give you the land of Canaan, and to be your God. And if one of your brethren who dwells by you becomes poor and sells himself to you, you shall not compel him to serve as a slave. As a hired servant and a sojourner, he shall be with you, and you shall serve you until the year of Jubilee. And then he shall depart from you, he and his children with him, and shall return to his own family. He shall return to the possession of his fathers. For they are my servants, whom I brought out of the land of Egypt. They shall not be sold as slaves. You shall not rule over him with rigor, but you shall fear your God. And as for your male and female slaves whom you may have, from the nations that are around you, from them you may buy male and female slaves. Moreover, you may buy the children of the strangers who dwell among you, and their families who are with you, which they beget in your land, and they shall become your property.
Okay. So Leviticus 25:35 through 45 tells us that a Hebrew might become a slave through poverty. And I have Exodus 22 verse 3 up there, but I'd like to look at Exodus 22 verses 1 through 3. And what we're dealing with here is a Hebrew might become a slave through crime. Pat, you had that?
If a man steals an ox or a sheep and slaughters it or sells it, he shall restore 5 oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. If the thief is found breaking in and he is struck so that he dies, there shall be no guilt for his bloodshed. If the sun has risen on him, there shall be guilt for his bloodshed. He shall make his full restitution. If he has nothing, then he shall be sold for his theft.
Okay. Now, I might mention in your handout, if you don't know where you are, is page 50 and 51 deals with chapter 21. So, in the event that a Hebrew became a slave, he was to serve but 6 years. If he was married when he became a slave, he took his wife with him when he left. If his master gave him another slave for a wife during his slavery, the wife and children she might have borne did not go with him. If the Hebrew's love for his wife and his acceptance of his master caused him to want to stay in his master's service, he could voluntarily become a permanent slave by submitting to a public ceremony in which he expressed his will to remain in the master's service. If a Hebrew woman was sold as a slave, she was not allowed to be released after 6 years, as were the men slaves. If the master did not like the Hebrew slave woman, he could allow her to be the men's slaves. He could allow her to be redeemed or bought out of slavery. But he could not sell her to a foreign nation. If she was married to his son, the woman should be treated as one of the master's daughters. If the son took another wife, the provisions given to the Hebrew slave woman were not to diminish. If he failed to do these things for her, she was freed from her slavery without money being paid. So you can see the laws were very restrictive and very specific in what could be done as far as the relationship of the master and the servant. Any comments through verse 11 or questions? All right. Verses 12 through 27 deals with laws concerning violence, but we're going to break it down a little bit. We're going to look at verses 12 through 17 first. And talk about that for just a moment. So, Stephanie, you want to read that, verse 12 through 17?
He who strikes a man so that he dies shall surely be put to death. However, if he did not lie in wait, but God delivered him into his hand, then I will appoint for you a place where he may flee. But if a man acts with premeditation against his neighbor to kill him by treachery, you shall take him from my altar, that he may die. And he who strikes his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. He who kidnaps a man and sells him, or if he is found in his hand, shall surely be put to death. and he who curses his father or his mother shall surely be put to death.
Okay, so it's significant that we see that statement in verse 17 when it says, and he who curses his father or mother shall surely be put to death. As observed above, the fifth commandment was to be taken seriously concerning murder, going back to Exodus 21, verses 12 through 14 that Stephanie just read. Scott's commentary comments that if a man strikes another willfully, whether out of previous resentment or sudden anger, it was to be deemed murder. But when it was merely by accident, which is here called God's delivering him into his hands, as God was thus pleased to take away the life which he gave, the cities of refuge would be appointed for him to flee to. Yet so far would they be from affording a security to the willful, presumptuous, deliberate murderer that he was to be taken by the officers of justice even from the altar of God itself and put to death. If he was the high priest, and in the act of sacrifice he was to be taken away without delay if he had committed willful murder. It is thought that there was some place appointed in the camp as a refuge for the unfortunate manslayer while the Israelites were in the wilderness. Again, you see very specific laws, if you will, concerning violence. And yet, when you look at what's taking place today, these laws seem to change. It is a crime, or it is unlawful to put someone who has murdered to death in many states today, but it is lawful to put a baby to death.
In a lot of states.
But shame on us for mistreating those children at the wall. Okay, so enough said.
The wall.
In verses 15, verse 15 deals with, let's look at that again. It says, and he who strikes his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. What we have here is the punishment of disobedient children that strike their parents or curse them. Look again at Exodus 17. And he who curses his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. And then verse 16 deals with man-stealing. He who kidnaps a man and sells him, or if he is found in his hand, shall surely be put to death. Again.
Doesn't that apply to all of Joseph's brothers?
Do what?
I said, wouldn't that apply to Joseph's brothers?
It could, yes. So here again, Mike Willis points this out. He points out that the man who struck his parents was subject to the punishment of death, according to verse 15. To strike does not mean to strike to kill. Cursing one's parents also was a capital offense, as we saw in verse 17. The violations of the fourth commandment, honor thy father and thy mother, could not be tolerated inasmuch as the stability of the society depended upon the stability of the family. Verse 16 deals with kidnapping, was also punishable by death. Again, very severe punishment for these crimes, if you will. Any comments through verse 17? All right. Look. Yes.
One thing I was
Shelton.
thinking about our last class that we talked about how in the fifth commandment it talks about your days on the earth shall be long. Do you think that could have meant because of these offenses were punishable by death, that these children, if they were disobedient in this way, would have been put to death right then? But if they were obedient to their parents, if they did act the way they should, they won't be put to death and they'll live?
Well, yeah, I definitely think that's true. If a child, and in the case of any of these crimes, as we're seeing here, if they were found guilty and everything, the punishment was death immediately. It wasn't, they weren't put in prison for 20 or 30 years and given the opportunity to appeal after appeal after appeal. It was a specific crime and a specific judgment and a specific punishment. But if they were obedient to their parents, if they were respectful, and this is what, you remember we went back and we looked at the qualifications of an elder that Paul wrote to Timothy about. Not to Titus, because Titus is worded a little bit different. But when you look at the wording in Timothy, if you look at those two verses, if a man has faithful children, and you look at the very next verse, you can see from the Greek word that we're talking about children who are respectful, children who are obedient. Yes, the father does raise the children in a God-fearing family, but we're talking about respectful and obedient children. If they can't be respectful and obedient, then a man's not qualified to be an elder to begin with. If he can't control things in his own household, then how can he control things or be a proper leader in the church? And so, yes, I think the days long would be a pleasant time too, because of the fact that they had that relationship, and it's a godly relationship. Any other thoughts? Good question. All right, let's look at verses 18 and 19 then. This is dealing with assault and battery. Florence?
If men contend with each other, and one strikes the other with a stone or with his fist, and he does not die, but is confined to his bed, if he rises again and walks about outside with his staff, then he who struck him shall be acquitted. He shall only pay for the loss of his time, and shall provide for him to be thoroughly healed.
I've sued that table that broke my leg and everything.
Oh, my goodness. Did you get it?
sue the manufacturer?
No.
And the importer and the sales store and.
Did it help your leg?
Well, then I'd have to sue my brother-in-law. He's the one that put the table together. So Mike Willis explains 18 and 19 this way. He says that when two men were fighting, if one struck the other so that he was confined to his bed, but he did not die, the other was only required to pay for his loss of time for work, which makes sense. Any thoughts?
How long did they wait to see if he died?
Well, I don't know. It doesn't say.
As long as he was in bed.
I guess
Said
so.
he arose, he could have arose the next day.
I mean, it's possible to hit somebody and incapacitate them for years.
Yeah, it's possible.
With your fist?
Oh, yeah.
Are you serious? Is he
Well,
serious?
If you hit someone hard enough and they go into a coma and everything, they may be there. But then you're talking about maybe brain damage or something like that.
That's what I'm saying. How
Okay.
long do you wait?
But if you're talking about someone who is struck and confined to a bed, maybe because of a broken arm, broken leg, or something like that, or maybe
Face.
face is pretty well beat up, various things like that, maybe a little bit of organ damage. Those are individuals who, after a period of time, are going to be able to get up and walk.
Yes.
But the scriptures doesn't say a length of time here.
If you hit him and break his neck like Superman was,
Okay.
he never got back up.
Well, when you think
All right.
about
Finally died.
medicine practices in this time, if somebody's in a coma for that long,
Well, he
they're
wasn't in
dead.
a coma, he just broke his neck and paralyzed him.
Yeah, they're dead. I mean, it happens. Today we might be able to keep them on machines for 35 years, but not back then.
That's what I said, how long do you wait to see if he died?
You didn't say.
I don't know, John. I'll research it more. Shelton, read verses 20 and 21 for me, will you please?
As long as he's confined to his bed, the other guy's gonna have to take work for him.
That's right.
Okay. That's all you need to know.
Right, there you go. That's okay.
Thank you.
Verse 20 says, "And if a man beats his male or female servant with a rod, so that he dies under his hand, he shall surely be punished. Notwithstanding, if he remains alive a day or two, he shall not be punished, for he is his property."
Okay, so here again, Mike Willis points out if a man strikes his servant so that he dies, he was to be punished. What the punishment should be is not mentioned here. So don't ask me. Okay? If he lingered a day or two, though, before dying, the master was not to be punished. The loss of property in the death of the slave was judged to be sufficient.
Now, that's kind of a loophole there, isn't it?
Do what?
That kind of acts like a loophole there. That's what I was going to ask you. So if he don't die immediately, he's not to be punished if he lingers on a day or two or maybe a week.
Right.
Because that's still his property.
Right.
And he died while still his property.
Right.
Is that other?
Yeah,
But
Yeah,
it was
John.
his property at the time he hit him too,
true,
so he was still his property.
He
true.
didn't say anything about that.
But the scripture is specific here. If the man is struck and he dies, then,
I'm just trying to understand why the time limit.
well, because God put it there.
Yeah, I know, but I'm
Strange.
thought maybe there might be somewhere or another, somewhere they might be, say, a reason for it.
Like Shelton said, there was no medicine, so 2 days maybe all you could,
Or 2 weeks
yeah.
in this.
Maybe this is why he has all wisdom and we don't.
That's true. All right, so now let's look at verses 22 and 23. This is hurting a woman with child. Let's see. Sharon, you want to read that?
Yes. If men fight and hurt a woman with child so that she gives birth prematurely, yet no harm follows, he shall surely be punished accordingly, as the woman's husband imposes on him, and he shall pay as the judges determine. But if any harm follows, then you shall give life for life.
Go ahead and read through verse 25.
Okay. Eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. Burn for burn, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. If a man strikes the eye of his male or female servant and destroys it, he shall let him go free for the sake of his eye. And, I read on.
Okay, that's all right. Go ahead and read verse 27 now, since you
And
wrote
if he
it.
knocks out the tooth of his male or female servant, he shall let him go free for the sake of his tooth. I
Okay.
didn't mean to read on.
No, that's
I'm
okay.
sorry.
That's all right. It all ties
It
in
felt
here.
good.
And as long as it felt good, you read it. So, what we have in verses 22 through 23 is hurting a woman with child. And our laws even today are very specific. If a man shoots and kills a woman that is pregnant, then he is charged or she is charged with not only the murder of the woman, but the murder of the unborn child as well.
How is that if they're okay to kill the kid?
Yeah, so I was
How
like,
should that be considered double homicide?
you can abort the child.
Yeah, but see, the mother did not choose.
She might at 9 months.
Well, she may, but we don't know that.
That
They
just
can do
shows
it
that
in
the
one
child
month.
is
Some
human,
areas.
is a child already, whether the mother chooses to have it or not. If you accidentally killed it, you can be charged for homicide.
True.
And if the mother accidentally kills it or on purpose kills it, she should be charged for homicide.
Right.
Should have been up there.
And so verses 24 and 25 that Sharon read deals with the law of retaliation. If a man strive and hurt a woman with a child, verse 22, Scott's commentary states that in case two men fight and the wife of one of them, being pregnant, interposed and received a hurt which caused her to miscarry, but produced no further mischief, the other party must be punished for the injury by a fine laid on him, to be paid to the woman's husband, who might lay his damages for the mischief, yet the magistrates must determine what compensation should actually be paid. Yes, Sheldon.
Do you think it specifies that the wife has to be one of the men they're fighting?
No. No.
Like what
The-
Scott's kind of said, that one of those men's wives, I don't think it has to be their wife, it's any woman
Right.
that's caught in the middle of it.
Right. And this is just a commentary. This is
Right, I
not...
was just asking.
no, your question's a
so
good
that I
question.
understood.
But if any further detriment followed to the woman, the magistrates were authorized to punish the offender even so far as to put him to death if the woman died, and in case of lighter injuries to inflict an exact retaliation on him. These were not allowances made to private revenge, but laws to regulate the magistrate's decision, who might go thus far if the heinousness of the offense required it. As a variety of mischiefs are stated, some of which could scarcely happen in the case referred to, it is likely that various other suits for person injury were determined by the same rule. Any comments through verse 25?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think that 24 and 25 are misused a lot.
Oh, they are.
In thinking of God's attitude towards vengeance, that He's okay with it, and these are simply the reason it says eye for eye, tooth for tooth is the punishment fits the crime. That's what He's trying to say. That it has to be true justice. That the crime fits the punishment.
Exactly right. And God does not authorize to take vengeance upon someone ourselves. That's what the laws are for, and that's what Moses is being instructed to give to the Hebrew people at this time. Any other comments or questions? Yes, Ron.
If the harm that comes to the premature child is death, wouldn't the man have to pay with his life?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, the point I've made of the passage too, it proves, to me at least, that the child in the womb is a living being rather than just a non-living entity that
Right.
people abort today. There, because life for life. If any harm follows, then you shall give life for life. So the baby that was in the womb is a living being.
Yeah, this is when our laws, and you're exactly right, this is where our laws will now claim that that is a living being, but yet there are, I forget now, I think there's 4 or 5 states who have now passed a law that even if the child is at 9 months, they can now put that child to death.
New York, after the baby is born.
There are some of them that even,
Virginia
in fact,
also.
the West Virginia governor made that statement. I'd have no, and he's a physician too. He says, I'd have no problem putting that child to death after it was born.
I can't believe
We
he
make
would
sure
say
it's
that.
comfortable before we do it.
Yeah, we make sure it's comfortable. Here's an interesting,
Out of your vein.
I saw this story, and this kind of relates to what we're talking about here.
You're getting these women all over. These women
This,
worked up.
this story relates to what we're talking about here. A mother, she's got one child that's a year old, and she's now expecting another child, and she's made the decision that she does not want to have 2 children only a year apart, that was just going to be too much work and effort.
It is.
So-
My grandsons are your apart.
Yes. So she goes to the doctor and she wants an abortion. And the doctor says to her, he says, well, why would you put your body through such a traumatic experience and everything? You could have some severe injuries yourself if we abort the child, and maybe even lose your own life. Says, why don't we just kill the child that's a year old, and then you give birth to this child? And she looks at the doctor and she says, that's murder. He says, well, isn't that what you want to do?
Yeah, I knew where you were going with that.
My niece's daughter just gave birth yesterday to her second child. Her first one will be 1 next month.
Why did she get pregnant if she didn't know that close together? There is ways. I have no sympathy.
It's work, but it's doable.
No sympathy.
So John, read verses 26 and 27 for me now.
Sure did.
Oh, that's right. She did read all the way through that. So,
Sorry.
that's okay. That's all right. No. Verses 26 and 27 says, if a man strikes the eye of his male or female servant and destroys it, he shall let him go free for the sake of his eye. And if he knocks out the tooth of his male or female servant, he shall let him go free for the sake of his tooth. What we're dealing with here is maiming a servant. Okay?
So that's okay?
No, it's not okay. If a master struck his servant to the extent that he caused him bodily injury, he was allowed to go free. Yes, John.
These are non-Hebrew servants.
Right.
The servant is going
Right.
free.
The
Yeah.
Hebrew servant's going to be gone in 6 years
I'm reading it
total.
together.
Right.
The master's punishment is losing. the
I'm
servant.
reading it like the master gets to go free, like it's okay that he did that.
Oh,
So
the
the
servant.
He loses the
servant needs to
servant,
go
The
free.
Right.
servant goes free.
Okay.
The servant is allowed to go free.
I was confused with how it's written.
That's okay. Good question. Any other questions? Yes, Donna.
I wonder how many of the servants first decided in the master to do that so they could get free.
I don't know, but when I
Maybe.
die, that'll be one of the questions I will reserve to ask.
You ready? Don't worry.
I don't think you'll even remember that question.
All right.
This one,
The latter part of the chapter deals with laws regarding control of animals. Let's break it down. Let's read verses 28 through, let's read 28 through 36. Ron, is that okay?
That's fine. If an ox gores a man or a woman to death, then the ox shall surely be stoned, and its flesh shall not be eaten, but the owner of the ox shall be acquitted. But if the ox tended to thrust with its horn in times past, and it has been made known to his owner, and he has not kept it confined, so that it has killed a man or a woman, the ox shall be stoned, and its owner shall also be put to death. If there is imposed on him a sum of money, then he shall pay to redeem his life whatever is imposed on him. Whether it has gored a son or gored a daughter, according to this judgment, it shall be done to him. If the ox gores a male or female servant, he shall give to their master 30 shekels of silver, and the ox shall be stoned. And if a man opens a pit, or if a man digs a pit and does not cover it, and an ox or a donkey falls in it, the owner of the pit shall make it good. He shall give money to their owner, but the dead animal shall be his. If one man's ox hurts another's, so that it dies, then they shall sell the live ox and divide the money from it, and the dead ox they shall also divide. Or if it has known that the ox tended a thrust in times past, and its owner has not kept it confined, he shall surely pay ox for ox, and the dead animal shall be his own.
All right. Now, here's Moses delivering all these laws to the Hebrew children, or the Hebrew people, rather. Think of the number of Hebrew people. There are thousands of Hebrew people here, and they're going to be in this wilderness for a period of time. And so here's laws not only regarding servants, but laws regarding women, laws regarding men, and now we have laws regarding the control of animals. Upon the sixth commandment, which forbids all violence offered to the person of a man, here in Exodus 21, verses 28 through 32, is an ox goring. Damage by opening a pit in Exodus 33 and 34, and cattle fighting in Exodus 21, verse 35 and 36. So Mike Willis states that in the event that an ox gored a man to death, the ox was to be put to death, but the owner was not liable for the man's death. Verse 28. However, if the ox were known to push his horns, the owner was guilty of criminal negligence and was punished with death. Verse 29. Look at that again, where it says, but if the ox tended to thrust with its horn in times past, and it has been made known to his owner, and he has not kept it confined, so that it has killed a man or a woman, the ox shall be stoned, and its owner also shall be put to death. And we see similar laws today like this. Right now, a law that we're very familiar with is the dealing with the pit bull dogs. If the owner knows that the pit bull can be dangerous and does not control that dog, then the owner will be held for a crime and will be judged and could be punished. So the judges might determine to levy a fine upon the owner to redeem his life from death. Verses 30 and 31. In the event that the ox gored another servant to death, the owner was to pay the owner of the servant 30 shekels of silver and then stone the ox to death. Verses 33 through 34 then deals with loss through negligence. And yeah, I've got that up there. Okay. So if a man dug a well and did not cover it, resulting in an ox or a donkey falling into the hole, the man was responsible for his negligence and had to repay the loss of the beast. And then verses 35 and 36 deals with the loss through ox goring. If one man's ox gored another man's ox to death, they were to sell the live ox and divide the money received from it. The meat from the dead animal was to be divided. And in the event that the one ox had been known to gore, his owner would be required to pay for the other's ox and did not receive any part of the dead animal. And so again, the laws are very specific as far as what the Hebrew people were expected. Yes, John, and then Sharon.
Well, mine says in 36, he shall surely pay ox for ox.
Mm-hmm.
That means you get the live ox that's known for goring, so you're going to come back to 29, and if you don't put that ox down pretty quick, you might be ending up being stoned.
Well, yeah, but
Dead animal.
I mean, if you look at the whole verse, or if it was known that the ox tended to thrust in time past. In other words, the owner knew that his ox would do this,
Guilty of that.
okay? And its owner had not kept it confined, he shall surely pay ox for ox. In other words, he shall pay for the dead ox, okay? And the dead animal shall be his own. In other words, he will not get any part of it, but the owner of the dead ox would get the meat. They wouldn't split the meat, as the earlier
Well,
verses
they
said.
both get the meat because they both got a dead ox.
Not in this case.
They only got a one dead ox. Read it again.
Not in this case, because this was an ox that the owner knew would fight,
You're
and he did nothing to control it. But in the previous verses, yes, if that was, look at verse 35. If one man's ox hurts another's so that it dies, then they shall sell the live ox and divide the money from it, and the dead ox they shall also divide. But in verse 36, if this is an ox that has been known to do this, and he doesn't control the ox by putting a harness on him or putting him in a corral, then he is responsible for paying for the dead ox, and he gets none of the meat from the dead ox.
Okay.
That
The guy that lost the ox gets all the meat.
right? You had a question, Sharon?
I was just going to say, back over here where it's talking about the ox gores and they stone the ox, they're surely, it don't say that they're dividing the meat or they're eating the meat, but surely they were.
Yeah, it says in verse 35.
No,
and
no,
the
no. Go back over.
29.
Rerun.
29?
Where they pre-tenderize the meat.
I'm not just saying 29.
Oh, but if the ox tended to thrust with its horn in times past, and it has been made known to his owner,
Well,
then
yeah, that it says it shall be put to death. I just wondered why it would say they would divide the meat over here, but surely they're not letting the meat go to waste, is what I was just
Well,
wondering.
and then 28, it talks about if it gores a man or woman to death, the flesh will not be eaten.
Yeah, I understood that one.
That's
And then it goes down to 29, it says that it should be put to death.
Mhm.
And it goes down to,
So they wouldn't eat that one.
yeah,
One.
and 32, so they wouldn't eat the
If
ones.
it killed a human.
Yes,
they
I
wouldn't eat
understand that,
and the owner would also be put to death in verse 29.
yes.
Right. But if it just kills another ox or damages another ox, then they can eat that.
What about when you stone this ox down here in, wait a minute, maybe we got one. Go on, let me just read it again and then I'll ask you. I just was thinking down here at 31, it looks like, not 31, 32. It should be, 32 is where the ox gores, that's where they're goring man or, okay,
When they stone the ox, they
Okay.
don't eat it.
okay, I see that. Thank
You see it? Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? All right, let's look at the questions on page 51 of your handout. True or false? One way a Hebrew slave could be set free is if his master struck him in the eye hard enough.
True.
True. 2, pierced ears really meant something to the Hebrews.
True.
True. 3, the penalty for owning a mean ox was the same no matter how many offenses had been committed. False. 4, spiting your father or mother was a capital offense. True. 5, under the law, guile had effect on the penalty or judgment against a lawbreaker. True. Name the penalty. And 6, killing a man.
Death.
Put to death. 7, striking father or mother.
Death.
Death.
Is it all
8,
death?
huh?
I said, are they?
8, stealing a man and selling him.
Death.
Death. 9, cursing father or mother.
Death.
Death. 10, owning an ox with a history of goring which kills a man or a woman.
Death.
Death.
If the owner did not put the ox up.
Right.
That's not what this question says, what's happened to.
Same thing with the
Well-
Do that to me. This says owning an ox with a history of goring, which
Yes.
kills a man or woman. Just read the question, John. Just the question.
Okay.
We're putting on,
I do counseling on the second Tuesday of each week.
I am not counseling, I'm going right straight to divorce court. You don't know what this man's put me through this year.
Let me-
Page 52.
Let me finish the questions real quick. Yeah, page
He's
52.
counseling you.
All right, fill in the blanks. The phrase blank
Life
for
life.
life for life in verse 23 is an indicator that life in the womb is just as valuable and important as life outside of it. Number 12. This is the year in which a Hebrew servant would have to be set free. Seventh year. 13. He that smiteth a man so that he die shall be surely put to death. 14. And he that curseth his father or mother shall surely be put to death. 15. Eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. All right.
And toe for toe.
We got through that. We'll look at chapter 22 next week.
You get to hear me counsel.
I'm gonna need you guys.
We need to fix this counsel.